Welcome back to the End Zone 2, presented by OCH Sports Medicine Services. We're going to finally bring in our special guests, the boys from Southeastern Drive Time, Steve Ellis and Anthony Craven. Guys, first of all, thanks for joining us, and let's get right into it. You've heard a little bit about what John and the guys have to say, but let's talk about Ole Miss first and Ed Orgeron. What's the situation there with him and his future?
Derek, you got to remember, first of all, we're radio guys, so you got to tell us where to look when we're talking here, okay? Not used to this television stuff. You asked about Ed Orgeron. You heard John talking about the situation up there earlier. I think it would be a huge mistake if Ole Miss were to change coaches at the end of this season. It's just the end of the third year, and you can't change coaches every 3 years because you're going to be back exactly where you were 3 years ago when they let David Cutcliffe go and brought in Ed Orgeron. I think it takes, in today's college football game, the fan wants instant success, but it's not always attainable, and I think 3 years just isn't enough time.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. They have to give him at least 1, maybe even 2 years. I'm a 5-year guy myself. Give a coach 5 years, see what he can do. But with that said, Steve, Coach Orgeron's situation a little bit different in the fact that he follows a guy in David Cutcliffe who all he did was win 7 and 8 games every single year and then was fired for it. So the pressure on Orgeron a little different than other coaches on the hot seat.
Agreed.
All right, guys, talk about the game this weekend, Mississippi State and Alabama. It's a big game for both teams, especially for Mississippi State, who's looking for their first bowl bid. What are your guys' thoughts on the games this weekend?
Derek, a couple of things. Freddie Millen, sitting next to you, grew up in Mississippi, played at Alabama. Matt Wyatt grew up in Alabama, played at Mississippi State. You've got the same situation today. Terry Grant from Mississippi playing for Alabama. Titus Brown from Tuscaloosa may be the best defensive end of the SEC. How does he get away? It's a war when these two teams play, and I think those guys will tell you that. One thing to look at, in the last 3 years, Alabama has not scored an offensive touchdown against Mississippi State. I don't think that will continue this year. Their offense, very high-powered. Y'all talked about DJ Hall, and Matt, I agree. He's the best wide receiver in the league.
It's almost the same matchup as a year ago where State's defensive and offensive lines almost physically dominated the Crimson Tide. Look for a similar thing to happen this Saturday, although it's clear Bama's offense is more explosive than it was a year ago.
All right, guys, I know you know a little bit about the Southeastern Conference because you talk about it, or at least attempt to every night.
That doesn't mean we know anything about it.
Let's go through some quick stuff here in the SEC. The biggest surprise, whether it be positive or negative?
I think the biggest surprise has to be Mississippi State being at 5-4 when many people thought they wouldn't win a single SEC game. They have a chance to go to a bowl.
I think that 11 of the 12 SEC teams may be bowl eligible. They may not all get there, but all but one could be seeing some postseason play.
Well, guys, that just reminded me of a question. Let's say 11 teams do get bowl eligible and Mississippi State only ends up with 6 wins. Do they get in?
I think so. I think they do. I think Mississippi State, I think a lot of people are pulling for the Bulldogs, and Coach Sylvester Croom, who's a fine gentleman, had a fine career at Alabama as a player and is now working as a coach in the SEC. I think a lot of people would like to see the Bulldogs in a bowl game.
I certainly wouldn't want to be on that bowl committee for that bowl game who says no to the Bulldogs and then has to deal with the PR afterwards saying no to Sylvester Croom and State.
Well, we talk about the coaches a little bit. Who is the SEC Coach of the Year?
Not a popular pick in this part of the country, but if he wins the league championship, you got to give it to Les Miles. A lot of people don't give him a lot of credit as being, I mean, let's be honest about it. They don't say he's the brightest guy in the world. Look at his record. Nobody in the league can match it right now.
Yeah, hard not to give it to Les Miles at this point, although if either of these two teams, Vanderbilt or Mississippi State, do become bowl eligible, it's going to be hard to say no to either Bobby Johnson or Sylvester Croom.
Now, guys, like we said, a possibility of 11 teams maybe getting bowl eligible. So is this an easy answer? Is the SEC the deepest conference in the country?
I think it is, hands down. There are other conferences that are top-heavy, have 2, 3, sometimes even 4 top-notch teams. But the middle and lower teams in the rankings in the SEC could hang with anybody on a consistent basis. I've always said, bring USC to the Southeastern Conference. Let them get hit on by these players in the SEC week after week. They'd be lucky to be in 4th place.
And guys, it's not just the 11 out of 12 teams might become bowl eligible. To me, the biggest thing that shows the SEC's depth is 8 teams, 3/4 of the conference in the BCS top 25.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us. We'll bring you back here in just a little bit, and we'll bring Matt, John, and Freddie back into this. Guys, anything that they said that jumped out at you?
Yeah, well, I got to agree with Steve as far as the Southeastern Conference, and I know these two would not argue the fact that it is the deepest, in the country. And certainly, I want to see some more games between these Pac-10 teams and Southeastern Conference teams. Yeah. We saw Auburn and USC a few years ago, and that was a split. I believe, or maybe I can't remember. USC may have gotten both of those. But I want to see more of that to prove that they can't take the beating week in and week out that these SEC teams dish out.
Well, I know LSU probably wouldn't mind seeing USC in this conference after that split national championship in 2003. All right, guys, coming up next on the End Zone 2, presented by OCH Sports Medicine Services, we're going to get picks from everyone and talk about what's coming up in the next couple of weeks.